So you made it through your introduction to music reading in lesson 3, and you're still here. That's a great sign. As you continue your piano journey, it's helpful to keep reviewing the things you've learned through piano practice, obviously, writing things out like your music worksheets, and listening to music. All of these things, your technique, musical understanding, and musicianship skills will work together to create the best pianist you can be. If you're here for the first time, welcome, and please make sure you know the very basics of note reading. If you don't, no worries, just go back to the previous lesson, which is lesson 3, and you can catch up. I'm going to play the beginning of 2 different pieces for you, and I want you to listen for the biggest difference between them, aside from tempo. So, what do you think? You might have said that the dynamics were quite different, and that's a really good guess. But honestly, there wasn't much difference between the dynamics. It was the touch that made them sound completely opposite. The Chopin melody is smooth and warm sounding, while the Haydn is very energetic and crisp. The way we strike a key is called articulation. So if I play very smoothly and connected, this is called legato, an Italian term, and it's notated in the score with a curved line called a slur. The slur can be written above or below the note heads. All the notes within the slur should be played nice and legato. So to play legato, make sure that you always have at least one key pressed down. Watch as I play your C position warm-up from last week. I press the first key, then I play the next key and lift the first key at the same time. And again. Compare that with letting my first key lift before I play the next key. Hear how the notes are separated and not connected? When I play really short and separated like I did in the Haydn, this is called staccato, another Italian term, and it's notated with a dot on either the bottom or top of the note head, depending on what direction the stem is facing. So the staccato dot will always be on the opposite side of the stem. Now let's take a quick detour and talk about the stem direction rule. If the note head is written on line 3 or above, the stem should point down. If the note head is written on line 3 or below, the stem should face up. So notice that on line 3, the stem direction can go either way. This rule is in place just because we don't want a stem sticking way up or down past the staff. Also, don't get the staccato dot confused with the dotted half note, where the dot is to the side of the note. When you play staccato, you've got to quickly lift your finger off the key right after you play it, kind of like you're touching a hot stove. And your wrist is going to be your little helper, so put your hand flat on a table or desk. And what I want you to do is stand up on your fingertips so that your wrist comes up first and your fingers are pointing down. And then lift off the table. When you first stand up on your tips, go ahead and really stand all the way up so that your wrist springs up first. This is one of the ways you play a staccato note on the piano, but this motion that I'm doing is magnified a lot. So let's make the movement a little smaller. And even smaller. So it's like a little flick. And then even smaller. There are other ways that we play staccato notes, but I love teaching this way first because then we're really focusing on and training our wrists to be flexible and loose. Let's check out your warm-up for this week. It's called Step, Skip, Finger Dance, and it's focused on articulation. So why is it called Step, Skip, Finger Dance? Well, a step on the piano is when we go from one key to the very next key, so we can step up or we can step down. You might remember from last week that when we step up or down on the grand staff, the notes go from a line to space note or a space to a line note. A skip is just when we skip over one note, so I can skip up or skip down. And on the grand staff, skips are really easy to recognize because they go from a line to a line note or a space to a space note. Let's look at the score to our warm-up. Knowing what we know about the way steps and skips look on the grand staff, let's get a general idea of when we'll be stepping, skipping, and repeating notes. We'll go line by line, and I want you to say whether they're stepping, skipping, or repeating, and then tell me the direction they're going, up or down. I'll give you about 3 seconds to pause the video if you want to try to figure it out before I give you the answers for each line. Ready? Here we go. Doing things like this really help you develop your sight reading and music reading skills because we're teaching our brain to recognize patterns. When I read music, I don't focus in on every single note. My eyes never linger on any one thing on the page for more than a split second. They're usually darting ahead of where I am and looking at larger chunks of notes. So when I see this, I'm not thinking C, D, E. I'm quickly noting that the first note is middle C, and then I instantly recognize that these are just steps going up. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I can glance at it for a split second, then quickly look away, and I know exactly what notes to play because I've seen this stepping up patterns hundreds, probably thousands of times. And you can get to that point as well by doing things like we just did with our warm-up score, so you begin to recognize those patterns. So we've been using the words step and skip. Now that we easily understand those concepts, let's start using the technical musical term. Whenever we're talking about the distance between two notes, we're talking about intervals. Intervals are measured using ordinal numbers. So the proper word for a step is a second because these notes are 2 notes apart. And skips are 3 notes apart, so they're called thirds. And as you might have guessed, we can keep going with fourths, fifths, sixths, sevenths, and eighths, which are commonly known as octaves. We'll focus on the higher intervals later, so for now, get used to recognizing seconds and thirds on the grand staff and on the piano. Now let's finally get to playing this step, skip, finger dance. I'm going to play it through once so you can hear it, and make sure to listen for legato and staccato notes. We've already talked about how to play legato and staccato notes, so I just want to quickly talk about these measures here with the 2-note slurs. The motion for these is down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, with the up starting with your loose wrist. The second note of the 2-note slur is played by that same upward motion we practiced to play staccato notes. That's the same thing. So it's down, lift, down, lift. And then finally, note the dynamic mark, mezzo forte, or otherwise known as medium loud, and your goal tempo of 120 beats per minute. The other part of your assignment for this week is playing an upgraded version of Landmark Landscape. This was the piece you practiced in lesson 3. I've revised the score to give you more opportunities to play with musical expression. So I took out the repeat sign and instead just wrote the notes a second time through. So the first half is played nice and smoothly in the right hand, while the last half has a staccato right hand. The other things I added were dynamic variation, and at the end, there's a rit. Now, the rit is an abbreviation for the Italian word ritardando, which means to gradually slow down. So it's not a slam the brakes, slow down, but a nice gradual decrease of tempo. You'll often find a rit at the end of pieces or sections because it helps feel like the piece is coming to an end. And finally, in the last section, I added an 8VA. This is an abbreviation for the Italian phrase all'ottava, which literally means at the octave. And if you remember when we were talking about intervals, we talked about the interval of the eighth, more commonly known as the octave. So when you see this 8VA symbol written above notes, it means to play those notes that are written within the dotted line 1 octave higher. You'll also often see 8VB, and it means to play an octave lower than written, and you'll see it written below the notes. So treble G is what's written. When I see an 8VA, then I know I have to move my right hand up an octave. The tricky part will be coming from measure 8 to measure 9 without missing a beat, because you've got that big leap there. So here's our upgraded Landmark Landscape. Feel free to play this a little faster than you did last week to have a nice flow to it, and you can even go a little bit faster than what the metronome mark suggests. Just experiment with different tempos and see how that affects the overall musical feeling. Okay, and that's going to wrap it up for us today. For your practice assignment, you've got the step, skip, finger dance as your warm-up, and then keep practicing Landmark Landscape, but now the updated version. Then in your worksheets, you'll have some music theory to do. There's a note naming exercise as well as an interval exercise. Also, make sure to check out the updated musical terms dictionary. And of course, all these things are in the download below, linked. For these assignments, I also want you to self-correct your work. In the downloads, I'll have a separate folder that's named Answers. And here's where your self-discipline and self-teaching come in. After you fill out the worksheets, I want you to check your work. If you found that you missed something, go through it again and see if you can figure out what went wrong. And don't forget to join our free private Facebook group, Piano Roadmap Community. Join, say hi, and ask questions. I'd love to see you over there. So have a great week, and I'll see you next time.